All right. Well, welcome back to the Global Mindfulness and Education Summit. And I'm here with an old friend of mine. I can't believe how long I've known Dr. Vo um,
No?
but, for a while. And Dzung Vo has written a wonderful book, The Mindful Teen, and he's been doing this work for a long time and living this work for even longer. And he's right now up in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I'll allow him to introduce himself far better than I could. So if you want to just take it away and introduce yourself a little bit on what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. I'm a pediatrician and I specialize in teenagers. My subspecialty is called adolescent medicine. And it's all about helping teenagers to be healthy, to be resilient, to thrive in the face of chronic health conditions, as well as mental health and social challenges. And I've found mindfulness to be a really important part of that work and an important part of my life too. So I'm really thrilled to be talking about that today.
Fantastic. And I guess to go back and maybe start with the personal journey and then the professional journey, can you share a little bit about how did you come to mindfulness? Or how did mindfulness come to you? I mean, it's never an accident, I think, how we discover it. But can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, thinking about this, the global nature of this summit, that really has a lot to do with my journey in mindfulness because I'm Vietnamese American, Canadian. So my family is from Vietnam, both of my parents. I was born in the United States and I've lived in Canada and worked in Canada for the last 9 years. And I have a dual US and Canadian citizenship right now. And I think all of these countries and my experiences have really fed into my mindfulness practice. But I really grew up with mindfulness. My dad was a practitioner, a Buddhist practitioner, as well as my mother. My dad was a student of Thich Nhat Hanh, Zen master from Vietnam, who I know has been a huge influence on you as well. And so growing up, I was surrounded by it, but I have to admit that as a kid, I wasn't into it. My parents dragged me to the temple, and I think there's a lot of reasons, one of them being internalized racism. I actually wasn't into it as a kid. I grew up in North Carolina, and there was a lot of racism that I experienced there.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I was into my late teens and early 20s, I started to learn more about Buddhism and mindfulness from an academic perspective. And I had a really key professor in university named Mark Uno, who I'm still in touch with, professor of Buddhism. And so I started studying it from a scholarly perspective. And then I started having these great talks with my family about how that really connects with what I had grown up with. And I started to come around and really started to embrace that. And right around the time I was finishing my undergrad, I was applying to medical school. And I told my dad, I'd really like to go to Plum Village, which is Thich Nhat Hanh's meditation center in France. I'd really like to go there before I enter medical school. And he was like, that's a fantastic idea, and I'm going to go with you. So that was really my first immersion was Plum Village, was being on a 3-week-long retreat with my dad and with Thich Nhat Hanh and about 1,000 other people.
That's absolutely beautiful. And just the idea of you, it's so interesting because I just expected that story to go a different way. It was like, I told my dad this is what I wanted to do, and he came with me. I was expecting it to be like, what are you, crazy? Like, that's so, like, what a blessing. That's just so fantastic. Yeah.
Really meaningful experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then how about like your journey in terms of mindfulness professionally? Like was it just, it was there in your family life and in your personal life, and then it just made sense that it would, obviously it launched your medical career in a sense, like as you then enter medical school almost from that retreat. But can you share like what was that like going through medical school and, even medical education? Could it use more mindfulness, do you think? Or, yeah.
For sure. That retreat was really the most important part of my medical training, even though it had nothing to do with medical school. But it really helped me to set the direction of what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be. I wanted to live a mindful life. And in medical school, I had tremendous stress, secondary trauma. The training is extremely rigorous and arduous, and there were lots of times where I felt like giving up, where I felt stressed, where I felt anxious, where I felt depressed. where I was grieving, where I was feeling the pain of the patients that I was working with. And really the one thing that helped me to get through that, well, actually the two things that helped me to get through it, one was mindfulness, and then second was the support I had from other people.
Yeah.
But if I didn't have those things, I don't think I would have made it through the training.
Yeah.
And then as I started to get into my adolescent medicine training and working with teenagers, I really started to see that the things that hurt and kill adolescents have a lot to do with stress. So these are things like suicide, depression, substance use, disordered eating, violence. Many of these things have to do with adolescents attempting to cope with stress, and being a teenager is really hard. And they want to feel better, but they don't know how yet. That's one of the things that they need to learn during their adolescence. So I started to think, you know, this mindfulness stuff has really helped me so much. Could it help the teenagers I work with? So then I started to explore how could mindfulness be useful in a healthcare setting. I started to learn about mindfulness-based stress reduction and the work of Jon Kabat-Zinn. And I took a course in mindfulness-based stress reduction when I was in my training. And that was really kind of two things coming together. On the one hand, it was something that was very well researched, scientifically based. And then on the other hand, I had my personal practice that I had been keeping up over the last 10 years. And what I really saw was that these two things were really the same thing, just couched in different language, different framing. And mindfulness-based stress reduction was actually a really nice way of bringing mindfulness into a Western health framework. And that's really when I learned that it could be useful in my medical practice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that's I think another interesting question, because you grew up in a familial, spiritual, cultural context where mindfulness was organically there. I mean, it was indigenous to your family and all of that. How has that been to see it also become secularized, become to an extent medicalized and put under the microscope? Like, does that feel complicated, or does that feel joyful, or all of the above, or what? How's that been for you?
Yeah, all of the above. I say on the one hand, it's been amazing. For me, it's been really rewarding that I can bring these two aspects of my life together, that I don't have to feel like one is work and one is my own life, and that the two are separate. So I feel really lucky that I can actually bring the practice, my own personal practice, into my work. So that's really rewarding. But yeah, sure, it's definitely complicated. I think, you know, as mindfulness has gotten huge over the last 10 years or so in Western society and in the mainstream culture, there's definitely been certain risks that come along with it. You know, there's risks about worrying, you know, is it watered down, or is it being divorced from, you know, some of the most vital elements, which we can talk about. But what are some of the key elements in mindfulness that may be getting missed in some of the popularization of it? And then also, is there something about cultural appropriation as well? Is there a risk of, you know, taking something that was developed in a certain cultural context, bringing it into a different context, but kind of ignoring the roots of where it came from?
Right.
And certainly in the US and to Canada to some degree, when we're talking about mindfulness and education, that's a real double-edged sword, because there is the whole element of not wanting to introduce religion in schools. So it gets very complicated.
I think that's like such a question I've been wrestling with, and I feel very lucky that I'm not working all the time in a public school, because it is also something that's spiritual for me, and that's not of my culture also, which is itself complex. But I think it's very tricky to then, I mean, I think it just keeps coming up, especially in that public school setting, of how do you explain this? It suggests that it's secular, but then also knowing a lot of these roots are developed in a very different context, and, you know, and colonial. I mean, there's just so much going on, and it's really hard to figure out how to move this forward with integrity. I don't think we're going to get to it in our half an hour, but I think it's a question to keep asking. And what mindfulness does is it tells us to keep asking the question, right? Whether we're finding an answer or not, or that answer can keep changing. But
absolutely, yeah.
So could you share a little bit about maybe some successes or misses, sort of those early days of starting to bring this into your medical practice and even sharing this with kids? I know you developed also the Mars A curriculum, at some point, but maybe share a bit about how that came about and the trial and error that went with that.
Well, I felt really lucky when I came to Canada in 2010. I started working at BC Children's Hospital, and it's a public healthcare system, so very much different from where I had done my training in the United States, which is all about insurance or fee for service and things like that. So we were able to see patients without regards of ability to pay, which is fantastic at a public hospital. And then the other thing I was really lucky is that my boss at the time really kind of believed in me and trusted me and gave me some kind of freedom to develop a program like this. So it's something that I don't think I could have done where I was in the United States, at least not at that time, although I think things have changed there as well. So it was really my first thing that I wanted to do. It was develop a mindfulness course for kids. And I teamed up with Dr. Jake Locke, who's been a great friend and mentor of mine. He's a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and he's also done a lot of work with mindfulness in his own life and his own career. And so we kind of co-developed this course together called MARS-A, Mindful Awareness and Resilience Skills for Adolescents. And we certainly took a lot of inspiration from the people who came before us. So certainly our own personal mindfulness practices, myself from Thich Nhat Hanh and Plum Village, Dr. Locke from the Spirit Rock tradition, where he did a lot of his training, but also the work of people like John Kabat-Zinn and Gina Beagle and some of the other people, and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy as well as Zindel Siegel and colleagues. So we kind of brought a lot of their work together, made a mindfulness-based intervention that was applicable for teenagers, that was developmentally appropriate, that was relevant for the population that we were working with, using a lot of our own personal clinical experience in how to make it applicable to teenagers. And in our case, the teenagers, the population that we were really hoping to help are teenagers with chronic pain and chronic medical or mental health issues, because those are the teenagers that we see at our hospital. So kids who are really struggling. So it's a clinical program.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to say how much I appreciate also just how much you, like, when you were describing the development of the program, you also really named all the people that influenced you, which I think is so important in our work, that we honor the researchers and the developers and the cultures also who have contributed in many ways to influencing our own work. It's an act of gratitude and an act of honoring.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is we didn't invent any of this.
Right.
All that we've done is we've learned and applied and put things together. But this stuff, as you mentioned, this goes back thousands of years. This is nothing new.
Yeah, absolutely. And how did the kids start to respond, like with some of these practices and programs, and even yourself? Like, were you? I still get nervous when I go and I talk to teenagers. I don't know. You look like you're much calmer. I don't know. How does it go? How did it go?
Yeah, I guess the first, a lot of the material, the source material, was developed in the one-on-one clinical setting. Both Dr. Locke and I had started to use these in one-on-one settings, and we kind of developed like a framework over 8 weeks, and then we brought it to the group setting. And certainly that first group that we ran, there was a lot of anticipation, there was a lot of excitement, and of course a lot of nervousness too. How is this going to go? What if the kids hate it? And the truth is, not everyone loves it. I think in the hype of mindfulness, we have to acknowledge that it's not for everybody, and that's okay. But it certainly helps a certain number of people. And I just had a really gratifying experience. One of the young people who I had worked with in her very first, our very first cycle of Mars, which was, I think, around 2011 or 12, she recently got in touch with me. She's now working in the mental health field. She still practices mindfulness every day. And she wants to help other young people in mental health, including mindfulness. And she's a real inspiration and a real leader, and is really rewarding to kind of get back in touch with her. Yeah.
I feel like that's what keeps me going. Is it's like, I don't know what seeds are getting watered, which seeds are growing. I'm out there, hopefully, kind of planting some seeds in some young people's minds and hearts. And then occasionally you get that email, or you get that, years later, someone comes back, and it's absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
For
Yeah.
sure. And I love your planting seeds metaphor. And, Thich Nhat Hanh talks a lot
Well,
about
that's
that too.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And I think in my own life, my dad was planting those seeds. And when I
Right.
was 15, those seeds were not growing, but something was happening inside of me.
Right.
And when I was 19, 20, 22, they really sprouted. And I see it in my sister as well. We see it in the young people as well. So I think for me, one of the big lessons I've learned is that if I'm really operating from integrity, from a place of my own practice, my own experience, and with real love, I just have to trust that something is happening in the kids that I'm serving. And my experience has shown that to be true. But there is a bit of a leap of faith in some places because you don't necessarily see it right away in the moment.
Right. Right.
Although sometimes you do as well, and that's pretty amazing too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But I love that, just that image of, like your dad planting the seeds, and it's like, I often say like it's the adults around the kids that are the water and the sunlight and the fertilizer that's allowing those seeds to hopefully grow. And that also comes out of our own practice and our own modeling and all of that too. But,
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So what do you feel like are the particular challenges that you're seeing up in Vancouver and in general with some of the kids that you're working with in this work? What are the challenges they're facing, and why do you think what do you think's going on? What's the matter with the kids these days?
I think in some ways what we're seeing in Canada is not so much different than what you're seeing in Boston. Mental health issues and challenges are on the rise. Unfortunately, suicide is on the rise here. And in Vancouver in particular, and in the West Coast in particular, we're seeing the rise of the opioid crisis. So right now in my province, British Columbia, overdoses from opioids is the #1 cause of death for teenagers 10 to 18. Or at least we don't have exact data, so I can't say that definitively, but the early data we have, it's looking like it's up there with the #1 cause,
Wow.
in suicides, car accidents, things like that. So one of the things that I'm really worried about is our kids learning how to cope with the stress and trauma. A lot of the kids who are at the highest risk have multi-generational trauma. And in particular, I'm very worried about our indigenous youth population. I think in the States, they call it Native Americans. So are young people who, they're the first peoples of our land. They were here long before immigrants, long before Europeans. And unfortunately, there is a very sad history of colonization and of oppression and marginalization of our indigenous peoples. Thankfully, in Canada, at least there's an acknowledgement of that, and there has been some, official apologies given, but we still have a long way to go, and those young people are still suffering a lot from multi-generational trauma because their parents were taken to residential schools, or their great-grandparents were taken to residential schools and abused and traumatized. And that's had, long-lasting effects. So I think that's big. That's one of the biggest challenges that I'm facing is how to reach the most vulnerable young people, the young people who need this kind of healing the most.
Yeah.
And then I think the other big challenge we're facing is just capacity. Mindfulness is getting really huge, but we don't have enough people who have a depth of practice as well as a depth of clinical skill to be teaching it. And so the demand is way higher than what we can meet.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you work with kids that have been through such challenging trauma? And again, so many of the kids you're working with are so high risk, and it is just trauma or coming in, when I work with kids with addiction histories or young people with addiction histories, it's like trauma can lead sometimes into, to the addiction, and then the addiction itself perpetuates more trauma because you're watching your friends die, you're watching your friends be arrested, you're watching, horrible things happen. You're subjecting, yourself and being subjected to trauma all the time. How do you tend to work, as a pediatrician with trauma or in a trauma sensitive way around mindfulness or just in general? Like, do you have any words of wisdom for folks doing this work with populations who've been through such severe trauma?
I think there's this whole field of trauma-informed care, and now trauma-informed mindfulness
Mm-hmm.
is getting a lot more attention, and I think rightfully so. I think in adolescent medicine, one of the things that we really value is uh, strengths-based relationship building. So really seeing what
Mm-hmm.
is going well with the young person, even a young person who is in crisis, who is in deep trouble, what is going well? What do we love about that young person? Asking that, naming it out loud, and then building on that. And that's not only for ourselves, but it's also for the other people who are involved in that young person's life. So it's for the other doctors or for the parents or for the social workers. We need to see that young person as someone who's got a lot of strengths and a lot of potential, not as someone who's broken. So that's the first thing. Second thing is unconditional love. So just being there for that kid no matter what, as best we can. And knowing that when they're experiencing crisis, their behaviors may be harmful to themselves or others, but it's because they're trying to cope with extreme pain, not because they're being a bad kid.
Right.
And then I think the nuts and bolts of it, I guess there's two experiences that have really taught me a lot. One is through some of my work with what in Canada we're calling social pediatrics. And that's a term I've heard used internationally, but not so much in the United States. And social pediatrics is the view that social determinants of health, things like racism, poverty, violence, discrimination, have huge effects on child health. And so to really focus on those things if we want to help young people be healthy. And in Vancouver, we've got a very active social pediatrics program, which I was really privileged to work with on the front lines for 9 years, where I went to a community center in a low-income area of Vancouver pretty regularly, a lot of Indigenous youth there, and I ran a mindfulness group once a month, which was drop-in, and it was really relational. It was all about just working with the young people where they are, honoring their strengths, and really seeing that a lot of Indigenous spiritual and healing traditions are quite consistent and resonated very well with mindfulness. And so I was often just learning from them or finding common language where we could connect on a common ground. But in reality, I wasn't really teaching them anything that they didn't already know.
Right.
It was framing it. It was giving some specific concrete skills and practices.
Yeah.
And I've also been really inspired by a counselor that I know who's Indigenous himself. His name is Kent Danielson, and he has this really amazing way of working with young people, Indigenous young people as well as others, where he takes them out on land-based healing. So he'll take them on these week or 2 week long canoe trips or camping trips, and he will incorporate mindfulness with hiking, with photography, and with Indigenous ceremony, and that's really medicine.
Yeah.
Is really healing for a lot of these young people. So that's been a real inspiration, and I think we need more of those kinds of outside the box approaches, meeting kids where they're at, outside of the clinic, outside of the hospital, and as well as changing the way that we meet them when they do come to the hospital.
Yeah. That is so inspiring. I mean, just the word social pediatrics. And then just hearing you talk about, meeting these kids with unconditional love and the non-judgment. And I mean, that's something that's taught, my training is as a psychologist and as a therapist, and that, goes back in my tradition to being talked about and sometimes being acted on, but being talked about anyway. And, there's stereotypes about doctors being so cold and being so clinical and being so, in the hospital, in the encounter, and to hear, just to be, just that there's such an acknowledgement of all of the social. I saw Gabor Mate, not even sure if I'm saying his name right, but he's out near you, right? I saw him speak, and he was really talking about this stuff a couple months ago. And that was also inspiring to, again, see this kind of coming into medicine in a truly more holistic and mindful way. I mean, seeing things as they are, seeing the true causes and conditions of sickness, of illness, of suffering, and suffering. The medical field is about healing suffering, and it doesn't have to be just the body. It can be healing all these other forms of suffering.
Yeah.
And that counselor that you work with also sounds like incredibly inspirational, and someone that'd be very interesting to talk to at some point as well, and hear about the work that they're
doing. But let's also be honest, like what I'm talking about is not easy, right?
Yeah.
unconditionally with love is not easy. Meeting them where they're at is not easy, especially when I'm feeling stressed, especially when I'm
Right.
feeling burnt out, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, which is, to be honest, it's quite a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's why, everything that I try to do on a good day, at least, is really coming from my own depth of practice, my own experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't really feel like I can teach anyone mindfulness, or I even have much to offer if I'm not, grounded myself, if I'm not regulated myself, if I'm not feeling some kind of openness or peace myself. And when I'm stressed, I close down too, just like everyone else. So I think, when we're teaching mindfulness to kids, we have to walk the walk. And when people ask me, how do I teach mindfulness to my kid or to my patient or to my student, my very first question is, well, what's your own mindfulness practice look like?
Right.
And how can you develop that? Or if you haven't started to develop that, let's talk about that first.
Yeah. 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 And I imagine also as a pediatrician, you are talking a lot, not just to kids, but you're meeting with parents, and it sounds like you're also working in a very collaborative way, at least at your hospital and your center. Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to. I mean, one of the things I'm really excited about right now is we're developing what we're calling the BC Children's Hospital Center for Mindfulness. So it's brand new. Launched this year. We have kind of a threefold mission. The mission is to really build a mindful community, and mindful community encompasses the patients, the young people that we're working with, but it also encompasses their parents and their caregivers, and then it also encompasses us as the health professionals who are trying to serve them. Because I really feel that if we're not able to kind of serve all of us together, I feel like we're really in this together. And if we can't all practice this and all heal together, then it's not going to work. So it's really about building a mindful community for all of us, which is a little bit different than some of the other centers for mindfulness that I know about, which are more focused on, the patients, for example. That's a part of what we're doing, but we really want to bring mindfulness to the whole hospital community.
Yeah. And how's that going? Has it been a challenge and a fun challenge? And
in a way, it's been a dream come true.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely been a challenge getting something brand new off the ground, kind of developing a model for it, a governance, a sustainability, and then actually doing the work. So it's kind of slow but steady. But I have a lot of faith. We have a great team. We've got some great supporters, both inside the hospital and outside the hospital. I feel like it's the right time and place for it. And, talking about planting seeds, well, it's kind of seeds that are coming to fruition that were planted, for the last 10 years that I've been working, but certainly even before I arrived, there were people like Jake Locke and Jane Garland who were really bringing this work to Children's Hospital for 20 years. So it's the right time, and I'm feeling really hopeful, but it's going to be slow and small to begin. We're going to try to be realistic, but we're also going to try to change the world.
Yeah, sounds good. So as someone who's maybe a part of a mindfulness center at a hospital on the opposite side of the continent, what advice would you have for getting a center going? What's helped it really become sustainable, or any lessons learned for do's or don'ts for myself, but also for our listeners, a lot of whom are probably thinking about or working at centers and establishing centers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the main lesson for me is don't do it alone.
Yeah.
I'm really inspired by one of the things that I learned from Thich Nhat Hanh, and what I understand is he was having a conversation with Jon Kabat-Zinn, and this was in 2014 when mindfulness was already getting pretty popular. And Jon Kabat-Zinn said, mindfulness is getting big, but what are we missing? And Thich Nhat Hanh said, we're missing Sangha, or community. And Thich Nhat Hanh's also said things like, without a Sangha, I can't do anything. And, we think of him as, this really inspirational figure, and rightfully so, but he doesn't do anything alone. Right. And it's been a big lesson for me. I don't do anything alone. So I've been lucky to be able to build and grow a really wonderful community. And I put a lot of time into trying to kind of cultivate that with our meetings. We really try to have a community sense. We do mindfulness meditation together. We eat together. And for our events, we try to have that same spirit. And I feel like that's really what's going to help it to be sustainable, rather than something that kind of comes and goes. So that's the hope.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think it's so true. One thing I found challenging about mindfulness in the West, and that I find so hopeful about Thai's ongoing message of Sangha, 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 is that it's like this thing isn't going to last if we all just go to our meditation centers or our yoga centers and we sit silently with a bunch of other people and then, like, never speak to them and then leave again. Like, how are we going to build a community? And people are longing for community. We're in this age of isolation, and to bring it back again to the adolescents, it's like, we've all got our devices that are supposed to connect us, but and yet study after study, adolescents, millennials is feeling more and more isolated, more and more alone. I can't remember what the recent study I saw was, about how many young people say they don't feel like they've got more than one close friend or even one close friend. And so just if mindfulness can bring us together in terms of creating community, then we also, then it's one of many things that it can, potentially help do. And I love that you're emphasizing this aspect of building communities.
Yeah, well, there's no other way from my perspective.
Yeah, yeah. So do you have anything else you wanted to add about some work that you're doing or interesting things you're hearing about, or anything on that note?
I guess thinking about what's going on in Canada, what I'm excited about, there's the Children's Hospital Center. We're also developing a Canadian national network. We've got some great colleagues at Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto, and they are developing something called the Mindfulness Project. I think some of the folks there, like Ellie.
Yeah, a lot of great stuff in Toronto. Yeah.
They've got the Mindful Society Conference, which is a fantastic conference. So I think we have a nice kind of national Sangha here as well. And then thinking about this transnational perspective as well, I was in Vietnam recently, and really lucky, first of all, to be able to reconnect with some of the roots of where I learned this from, which is Thich Nhat Hanh's temple, root temple in Hue, which is called Tu Hieu Temple. So I spent some time there last month. And then also seeing how the practice there is really flourishing, both in society, including in schools. And there's a really cool project there called Happy Schools, where they are using mindfulness, they're using social emotional learning. It's certainly very influenced by Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, which there is completely culturally consistent. I've been able to have my book, The Mindful Teen, translated into Vietnamese, which has been really rewarding. And so they're
wonderful
as well. Unfortunately, I can't read it myself. My but it's being used there. So I think that's a great example of mindfulness in education in a different cultural context, and really connecting with the cultural and spiritual elements of mindfulness in a way that might not be possible in the United States or Canada.
Right, right. And as for the Mindful Teen, it's so cool that I saw you posted a cover recently. The cover is also beautiful, the Vietnamese edition. You working on any more writing projects? Is that in your future, or thinking about that, or mostly building this center and building the community?
Yeah, I've got a few things kind of in my mind, but nothing concrete yet. So if they move into the reality stage, then I'll.
Great. Well, are there any practices that you found that kids in Vancouver or anywhere, kids anywhere really, particularly resonate with or respond to, that you either want to describe or maybe even guide us in?
Yeah, I'll just share the kind of the foundational practice that I use myself and that I always try to teach the people that I'm working with. And certainly I feel that teenagers really resonate with this, as well as adults. I'm just going to reach over and grab my friend here. My friend being this bell. And this is breathing and smiling. This is, I learned from Thich Nhat Hanh. And breathing helps us to connect to the present moment, connect with our body. And smiling reminds us that there's a heart quality to mindfulness as well, that there's a kindness and compassion. It's not just about attention. It's not just about focus. It's not just about concentration. And I know that's actually a big debate in the mindfulness field about, is compassion part of mindfulness or not? For me, because I grew up with learning from Thich Nhat Hanh, they're inseparable. But I know that from some scientific clinical perspectives, they're a little bit different.
Yeah.
So this is breathing and smiling. Hearing a sound of the bell, It's a reminder that we don't have to go anywhere. We don't have to do anything. We can just be here and now. And connecting with our breathing, just noticing what it feels like to breathe. We don't have to control our breathing or force it to be a certain way. Just noticing, paying attention to being alive in this moment. Breathing in, I know that I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know that I'm breathing out. In, out. And now inviting a smile to the corner of our lips. If you're willing to, physically bringing a gentle smile to your mouth. And this smile is just an invitation to greet the present moment with an attitude of kindness and of caring. You would smile to a friend if you passed them in the hall. And you can smile to whatever experience you're having, whether it feels good or whether you're having a difficult experience, whether you're noticing some stress or some pain. You can smile to that too. Breathing in, I know that I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I smile. Smiling to the present moment. Smiling to my experience just as it is. Hearing that sound of the bell, returning to our day as best we can, continuing to breathe and to smile as we go through the rest of our day.
Thank you. Actually surprised by how kind of moved I am. That was, those Thich Nhat Hanh inspired practices were really my first exposure to formal mindfulness, and the blooming of the lotus and those kinds of phrases really bring me back to my early practice. And I'm also just realizing it was exactly 20 years ago, and maybe 2 weeks, that I went on a retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh, and my practice and journey really began on this. So it's nice to reconnect with that practice.
Same for me, 1999. So we are brothers.
Littermates and ties tradition. Wow. Well, thank you so much. And if people want to learn a little bit more about you or your book, is themindfulteen.com, is that still?
Mindfulness for Teens.
Mindfulness for Teens. Thank you. Sorry about that.
There's some guided practices on there, some recordings that are free, some videos, some of my favorite books and resources, including yours. Great.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. And yeah, you and I will catch up, I'm sure, again soon. So thanks again. And thank you again for all just the wonderful work you're doing, on behalf of adolescent beings everywhere and their caregivers and their siblings and everything. I just really appreciate the work that you're doing. And I know so many people do. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you to our audience. I hope that people find it useful, and it's been a real joy and pleasure talking to you today, Chris.
Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.